There are silences that don't come from peace, but from fear. And the cruelest silence is the one that grows from hunger. Hunger that gnaws at your bones, stretches every minute into an hour, every day into a lifetime. I know that silence. I survived it. My name is Geraldine Frances Holloway. I'm 72 years old, and I live in a small town in rural Georgia where folks know me as the lady with a warm plate always ready. Every afternoon, I cook something to share. But what no one knows is that hunger, real hunger, is what shaped the woman I am today. I decided to tell my story now because, for the first time in decades, my chest feels ready to open without breaking. Though I feed others with love, the pain has always sat quietly at my table. What I lived through as a young girl, I never told my children or grandchildren. But sometimes, as I peel garlic or stir a pot of beans, the memories come back with a sharpness that begs to be heard. And today, I'm finally listening. I don't want pity. I'm long past that. What I need is to release this knot that has choked my throat for years. Some wounds don't heal in therapy. They heal in honesty, in stories shared like recipes passed down. So here I am, sitting with a warm blanket over my lap, a glass of sweet tea by my side, and a heart ready to tell. If my words touch someone, if one soul finds comfort in them, then that little girl inside me will feel seen. That little girl had tangled hair, scraped knees, and hands that knew how to knead dough better than most adults. I was born into a poor family, yes, but our house overflowed with love. My mother taught me that feeding someone was a sacred act of care. Every time I smell onions sizzling in oil, I feel her near again. The kitchen was our sanctuary, but it was also the room where my childhood shattered, the first place where I felt the bite of real cruelty. I was just 14 when I stopped being a child, not because of some early romance or responsibility, but because of death. My mother died suddenly without a goodbye, and what came next was a woman named Miss Vanda, brought home by my father, wearing a plastic smile and perfume that lingered too long. In her presence, our house lost its warmth and started smelling like fear. I never imagined that the kitchen, my safest place, would turn into a battlefield. That one day I wouldn't even be allowed to smell what was cooking beyond a locked door. 10 days. 10 days without food, without water. 10 days where my stomach cried and no one listened. But even then, especially then, something in me refused to die. If you're hearing this, maybe something in your heart stirred. If it did, please like this video and subscribe. It helps me keep sharing stories like this. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? Now let me take you to where it all began. My childhood began under the hot sun of a quiet rural town in southern Georgia, where red dirt roads stretched for miles and the cicadas sang louder than the church bells on Sunday morning. We lived in a small wooden house with a tin roof and a screened-in porch where Mama grew mint and tomatoes in chipped ceramic pots. Life wasn't easy, but it was honest. The kind of life where you made biscuits from scratch, drank water from the well, and shared whatever you had. Even if it was just half a cornbread muffin, there were 4 of us. Mama, Daddy, my 2 younger sisters, and me. The oldest, the helper, the one Mama said had kitchen hands since I was knee-high. Mama's name was Rosie May Holloway, and she was the soul of that house. She could make something out of nothing, turning dried beans and a ham hock into a Sunday dinner that made your toes curl. She sang old hymns while she cooked, her voice soft and steady, like a rocking chair on a quiet evening. She taught me that cooking wasn't just about feeding, it was about remembering, healing, loving. When I think of her now, I don't see her face. I smell fried okra and hear her humming Precious Lord. My daddy, Samuel Holloway, was a man of few words. He worked long hours on a neighbor's peanut farm and came home with sunburned arms and cracked hands. He didn't show affection the way Mama did, but every now and then he'd bring home a sack of oranges or a small tin of molasses, and that was his way of saying he loved us. I respected him, but I was always closer to Mama. Her love was like a quilt, soft, patchworked, and always warm. Sundays were special. We'd all dress in our best, dresses pressed with a hot iron, shoes polished with bacon grease if there wasn't any wax, and head to church. After service, Mama would make fried chicken and sweet tea, and we'd eat out on the porch while the breeze stirred the pecan trees. Those afternoons smelled like cut grass and tasted like heaven. We didn't have a lot, but we had enough. My sisters, Lucille and Carmela, were full of mischief. We made dolls out of corn husks, dug tunnels in the dirt, and played under the clothesline until we got called in for supper. At night we all shared a bed, pulling the covers tight and whispering stories until sleep took us. I always told them, one day I'm going to be a cook for real. They'd giggle and say, we'll eat every bite. Our school was a small red brick building about 3 miles from home. I walked barefoot most days, carrying my books in a flour sack tied with twine. Our teacher, Miss Clarabelle, was strict but kind. She smelled like chalk and peppermint, and she always gave me her extra lunch if she thought I looked hungry. I loved to learn. But even more, I loved getting home and helping Mama in the kitchen. That was my real classroom. There was a day when Mama taught me how to make biscuits from scratch. Don't use measuring cups, she said. Use your feeling. She placed my hands in the dough and said, this is where the truth is, baby, in your hands. I never forgot that. Even now, I measure with memory and knead with care. Cooking became my prayer. Summers stretched like warm taffy. We'd chase fireflies, swim in the creek, and pick blackberries until our fingers turned purple. Mama would make jam from what we didn't eat, and Daddy would sneak spoonfuls at night when he thought we weren't watching. It was a time when everything felt wide open and safe. There was an old lady who lived down the road, Miss Hattie. She brought us jars of pickled peaches and sometimes a pie if she was feeling generous. Mama always sent her back with something, even if it was just a jar of soup. Folks around there helped each other. You didn't need to ask, you just did it. That's how it was. Mama had this old recipe box, wooden, scratched up, full of handwritten notes. Sometimes she'd let me pick a card, and we'd make whatever was on it. One day it was peach cobbler. The next, it was chicken dumplings. That box was like a treasure chest. Each card, a piece of her heart. I used to dream of having one just like it. At night, Mama would rub my back and sing me to sleep. Her voice was the last thing I heard before dreams took me. She'd tell me stories of her own mama, of the hard times, of how food always brought people back together. I didn't know it then, but she was preparing me for a world that wouldn't always be kind. Birthdays were simple. A yellow cake, maybe some lemonade, and a few songs around the table. But those moments meant everything. They were proof that we mattered, even when the world outside didn't seem to notice us. Mama made sure we always had at least one day a year that felt like sunshine. I remember once, we ran out of flour the night before Sunday. I thought we'd skip biscuits, but Mama crushed up old crackers, added a touch of lard, and baked them into something so warm and crispy I cried. See, she said, love don't run out just 'cause supplies do. My favorite time was early morning when it was just me and Mama in the kitchen. The world still sleeping, the coffee percolating, and the smell of sausage in the pan. She'd teach me little things. How to flip a pancake without tearing it. How to tell when chicken is just right. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. Seasons passed like chapters. Spring brought wildflowers, summer brought sweat, fall meant sweet potatoes, and winter meant hush-hush evenings by the stove. Everything had a rhythm, a pattern. The land, the meals, the memories. It was a life built with care, and I thought it would last forever. Mama always said, a home ain't measured by what it's got, but by who it feeds. And ours fed a lot more than bellies. It fed hearts, souls. Even now I try to live by that. Even now I miss her every time I turn on the stove. It all changed in the time it takes a pot to boil. It was a Sunday, like any other. Mama had just finished frying chicken and was slicing up sweet potatoes when she paused. Just stood there, knife in hand, her eyes losing focus. I asked if she was okay, and she nodded barely. Then she collapsed. Hard, sudden, right. There on the kitchen floor. The knife clattered beside her. She didn't say a word. Didn't blink. By the time the ambulance got there, she was gone. They said it was her heart. I was just 14. Her funeral was small, plain. A wooden coffin, a few hymns, some neighbors bringing covered dishes we couldn't bring ourselves to eat. I held my sister's hands so tight their fingers went numb. Daddy stood by the grave, stiff, silent, like he was already halfway gone himself. When we got home, the house was too quiet, the kitchen cold, her apron still hanging on the hook, still smelling like cinnamon and soap. I didn't cry, not then. I think I was too stunned to understand what forever meant. The days after her death bled into each other like a muddy river. I tried to cook, but nothing tasted right. The biscuits didn't rise, the beans didn't soften. My sisters looked to me for comfort, but I was running on empty. Daddy stopped talking altogether. He'd come home from work, wash up, eat. Whatever I managed to scrape together and disappear into his room. It was like he turned to stone the day Mama died. We were adrift. Then came Miss Vanda. A few weeks after the funeral, she showed up on our porch in a powder blue dress, hair pinned up tight, smelling like lavender and mothballs. Daddy introduced her as a friend who's gonna help out. Said she used to be a nurse. She smiled like she meant it, but her eyes were sharp, too sharp. I didn't like the way she looked around the house, like she was already moving in. And within days, she was. At first, she played nice, brought us candy, fixed Lucille's braids, cleaned the house like she owned it. Daddy started talking again, mostly to her. They'd sit on the porch drinking sweet tea while I washed dishes and minded the girls. I watched her every move. Something about her smile. It never reached her eyes. She kept touching things, rearranging them, taking down Mama's recipe cards, folding away her aprons. I put them back up. She took them down again. Then she took over the kitchen, told me to go sit down, like I was one of the little ones. Her food was tasteless, her hands clumsy. But Daddy didn't care. Said it was good to have warm meals again. That cut me deep. I'd been trying. I was just a kid, but I tried. After that, I was allowed in the kitchen only to clean. My sisters didn't notice much. They were still so young, still hoping this new woman would fill the hole Mama left. But I saw the truth. Miss Vanda wasn't here to help. She was here to erase. One night, I caught her burning one of Mama's old cookbooks in the backyard. She told me without flinching, time to let go of the past. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I swallowed my rage. But from that night on, I knew I was not safe. She started punishing me in small ways, taking my plate away before I'd finished eating, giving me chores that kept me from school, making me wash clothes in cold water until my hands cracked. And Daddy, he never said a word. He watched it all with empty eyes. That was the beginning of the end. Not the death, not the fire, but that silence, that cowardly, cruel silence. It started with small things. One morning, Miss Vanda told me I wasn't allowed in the kitchen until after she was done cooking. Said I made too much noise. Then she moved me into the back utility room, the one with no windows and a door that stuck if you closed it too hard. She called it my own space, but it wasn't a space. It was a storage closet with a cot and a bucket. I knew what she was doing. She was isolating me, shrinking me down, and Daddy just let it happen. Soon, I was only allowed to eat after everyone else. Whatever was left over, a piece of bread, a cold potato. Some nights, nothing. Miss Vanda told my sisters I had a stomach problem and needed to rest. She told the neighbors I'd gone to live with an aunt in Alabama. She told me, with her eyes and her mouth, that I didn't matter. And eventually, I started to believe her. She made me scrub the floor with bleach until my knees bled. Made me carry water from the pump in the cold. Said I was learning responsibility. But what I was learning was how to disappear. I became quiet, careful. I moved like a shadow. I never spoke unless spoken to. I folded in on myself like paper. Then came the day she locked the door. I had talked back. said I wanted to go to school, asked why my sisters could and I couldn't. She didn't yell, just smiled real slow and said, "You don't need school. You need to learn obedience." That afternoon, she pushed me into the utility room, shut the door, and turned the key. I thought it was just for the night. It wasn't. The first day, I waited by the door, knocked softly, then louder, no answer. The second day, I started calling out, "Please, Miss Vanda?" Still nothing. On the third day, I began to panic. My mouth was dry. My stomach screamed. I banged my fists until they were sore. Still no answer. The fourth day, I started tearing up rags and sucking the damp ends to trick my body into thinking I was drinking something. It didn't work. I thought I was going to die. I lost count around day 6. The only way I knew time was passing was by the sliver of light that sometimes came through the crack under the door. I heard people moving around outside, laughing, talking, living, and I was in the dark, starving, forgotten. I prayed, not to be rescued, but to stop hurting. My body ached, my skin burned, my thoughts started to drift into strange places. I saw my mama's face, heard her humming, smelled her cornbread, but she was gone, and I was alone. On the 10th day, I stopped crying. I just lay there, curled up, waiting. I thought maybe if I died, they'd open the door just to throw my body out. I was so light I couldn't feel my legs, so hollow I could hear my heart echo inside me. And then, miracle or mercy, came the knock. It was my cousin Yolanda. She came to drop off some supplies and said she felt like something was wrong. Vanda opened the front door with her usual grin, but Yolanda saw past it. She asked to use the bathroom. Then she asked to get a glass of water. Then she made her way toward the back. When she opened that door and saw me, filthy, weak, barely breathing, she didn't scream. She just knelt beside me and wrapped her arms around me. She didn't confront Vanda. Not then. She helped me to my feet, got me a sip of water, and whispered, "I'm coming back for you." And she did, but not just with food or clothes. She came back with fire, and with a plan. Yolanda came back the next day like she said she would. She brought a grocery bag full of beans, rice, canned peaches, and some gauze, told Miss Vanda she was just checking in, smiled like everything was normal. But when she made her way to the back and closed that door behind her, she dropped the act. "I don't know what all she's done to you," she said, "but I can see enough to know it ain't right." She gave me water, wiped my face, and left a jar of peanut butter under the cot before slipping out the back. That jar kept me alive for days. From then on, I survived in shadows. Yolanda kept coming. Small visits, small drops of food, always with some excuse, borrowing sugar, returning a dish. She never raised suspicion, and I learned to follow her lead, to smile when I was supposed to lower my eyes, to nod like I was thankful. Inside, I was still broken, but outside, I became exactly what Vanda wanted: quiet, invisible, obedient. It was the only way I could stay close enough to watch. I lived in that back room like a ghost, ate in silence, slept in fear, woke up with dreams of cornbread and warm hands that no longer existed. I started hiding food wherever I could, inside pillowcases, behind boxes, in holes I dug under the floorboards. Every bite was a rebellion, every swallow a reminder that I was still here. The worst part wasn't the hunger, it was the forgetting. I was starting to forget the sound of my own voice. I'd catch myself whispering songs Mama used to sing, just to remember how words felt in my mouth. I'd hum while sweeping the floor, low enough that Vanda wouldn't hear. I needed something, anything that still felt like mine. Miss Vanda got bolder. She'd come in the room without knocking, inspect the space like a warden. I kept everything clean, neat. "Aren't you just the picture of humility?" she'd say, mocking. I smiled. I nodded. I bowed my head, but my eyes never stopped, watching. I learned her routines, what time she left, what time she returned, when she let her guard down. I was building something slowly, quietly. My sisters stopped asking questions. Carmela would sometimes leave a folded napkin under the bed with half a biscuit in it. Lucille avoided me altogether. I didn't blame them, they were just trying to survive too. We were all trapped in our own ways. That house was no longer a home, it was a stage, and we were all playing parts. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the window glass and not recognize myself. My clothes hung loose. My skin was pale. My eyes were older than I remembered. I looked like someone who'd lived 3 lives. I started writing in the margins of an old church bulletin Yolanda had given me. Words, thoughts, prayers, not for anyone else, just so I wouldn't forget how to think. I began to dream differently, not of food, but of escape, of stepping into the sunlight without fear, of making biscuits without permission, of singing out loud. I wasn't planning anything yet, but I was imagining. And imagination, I realized, was the seed of freedom. Miss Vanda underestimated me. She thought I was weak, beaten, and maybe I was, but I wasn't done. Every time I saw her burn another of Mama's recipe cards, I promised myself I'd remember them. I recited them like poems, like scripture, because when you've lost everything, memory becomes your armor. Yolanda noticed the change. She brought me a small notebook, said it was for recipes, but she knew better. I wrote down everything, times, names, events. It was my gospel of truth. I hid it under a floorboard wrapped in plastic. If anything ever happened to me, that notebook would speak for me. One day Vanda made me serve dinner at the table. It had been months. She said it was to remind me of my place. But as I set the plates down and spooned out the mashed potatoes, something inside me shifted. I stood straighter, moved slower, made eye contact with my sisters. And when I returned to the back room, I smiled. For real. That night I told Yolanda I was ready. She nodded. Almost, she said. We need one more thing. We need to make them listen. That's when we came up with the dinner. One final meal. My way. My story. Not just with food, but with truth. I started gathering ingredients. Slowly, secretly. Yolanda brought what she could. A neighbor unknowingly contributed onions and garlic. Even my sister Carmela, now old enough to understand, slipped me a jar of broth. We were building a meal like a message. I cooked with trembling hands and steady purpose. Fried chicken, cornbread, green beans with bacon, just like Mama would have done. The smells filled the house like ghosts come home. Vanda watched, confused, suspicious. But she let it happen. Maybe she thought it was a trap. Maybe she thought I'd break. And maybe I did. But not the way she expected. When the meal was done, I set the table myself, laid out plates, poured sweet tea, called everyone in. They sat, ate, chewed in silence, and I watched them, my sisters, my father, Vanda, with a calm I hadn't felt in years. Do you know, I said finally, what food tastes like after 10 days without eating? No one answered. No one looked at me. But the silence, they heard me in it, loud and clear. That silence around the dinner table didn't haunt me. It freed me. For the first time in years, I wasn't the girl hiding in the dark. I was the one who had cooked the meal. I was the one who had spoken. That night I didn't cry. I didn't retreat. I cleaned the dishes with steady hands, humming one of Mama's old songs under my breath. Vanda watched from the doorway, her face unreadable. She was losing control, and I knew it. The next day, she tried to punish me, told me I couldn't eat for speaking out of turn. I nodded, said nothing, but I'd already eaten something she couldn't take away, my own power. I wasn't afraid of her anymore. I wasn't looking for her approval, and that scared her more than my words ever could. I started moving differently, not sneaky, not cowering, quiet but deliberate. I did my chores without complaint, but I stopped flinching when she raised her voice. I started saving scraps of paper again, writing in the margins, documenting everything. I kept my notebook close, hidden like a blade. Yolanda came by with more frequency. She could tell the winds had shifted. "It's coming," she whispered one afternoon, while handing me a sack of cornmeal and collards. "You're almost there." I smiled at her, a real smile this time, and said, "I know." We both knew what we were building wasn't just escape. It was a reckoning. Carmela became my quiet ally. She was older now, starting to understand the way silence had kept us trapped. She began sneaking me notes, memories of Mama, old recipes she'd written down from what I'd whispered to her at night. We were rebuilding something, not just a past, but a future. Vanda started unraveling. She began snapping at everyone, burning food, forgetting errands. My father stayed out longer. When he came home, he ate and left. But one night, he looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in years. He didn't say a word, but I saw something flicker behind his tired eyes. Maybe regret, maybe shame. I decided to test my voice again. One morning I answered the door when the pastor stopped by. He asked how I was doing. I looked him in the eyes and said, "I'm learning to cook again." He smiled, confused, but I knew what I meant. And I knew Yolanda was listening from around the corner. Her face lit up with quiet pride. We planned the second dinner, a goodbye meal. But this one wasn't for my family. It was for me. I chose the recipes carefully. Fried catfish like Mama made, biscuits from scratch, sweet potatoes with brown sugar. I cooked slow, purposeful, like a sermon. Each step was sacred, each scent a memory. That night, I laid out the table just like before. Everyone sat down, even Vanda. She looked unsure but sat anyway. They ate. No one spoke. The tension was thick, but I didn't care. I had one more truth to offer, and I gave it without apology. "This meal," I said, "was made by the hands you tried to break. But I'm still here, and I remember everything. No one moved, no one chewed, but they all heard me, and that was enough." If this part of the story touched you, please like the video so more people can find strength in it. Thank you for listening. The morning after that dinner, the house felt colder than usual. Not in temperature, but in tension. Vanda didn't speak to me, didn't look at me, just walked past like I was a shadow on the wall. My sisters moved quietly. My father stayed gone until late, but I knew I'd stirred something, and things wouldn't hold much longer. That afternoon, I overheard Vanda on the phone. Her voice was sharp, panicked. "She's not staying much longer. I'm sending her away. She's becoming a problem." I held my breath behind the wall, heart thumping in my chest. I knew what she meant. Another lock, another lie, maybe worse. I had no more time. I went back to my room and pulled out the notebook, the letter I'd been writing for weeks, and the small key Yolanda had slipped me weeks earlier. That night I didn't eat. I packed. A change of clothes, the notebook, a half loaf of cornbread Carmela had left under my pillow. I wrapped it in a kitchen towel Mama had embroidered before she died. I folded the letter into an envelope and sealed it with trembling fingers. It was addressed to Pastor Jenkins. He was the one person I thought might believe me. I waited until the house was asleep. The floor creaked under my steps like it was warning the walls. I slipped out through the back, unlocked the storage gate with the tiny key, and walked, fast, breath shallow, heart loud. I didn't run. I couldn't. My legs were too weak, but I didn't stop either. Yolanda was waiting, parked under the sycamore tree near the abandoned gas station 2 miles down the road. When she saw me, she got out without a word, just opened the door and held me, and I broke. My body collapsed into her arms, every tear I'd swallowed in those years coming up at once. "You're safe now," she whispered. "You're safe." She drove me to her house in Macon, far enough that no one would come knocking. I slept for 2 days straight, only waking to sip water or cry quietly. On the 3rd day, I asked her if she'd mailed the letter. She nodded, said the pastor had called, shaken, and promised to look into everything. That was enough for me. I wasn't looking for justice, just a little bit of truth. In that quiet, in that safe place, I started cooking again. Yolanda handed me her kitchen like a gift. I made biscuits, slowly, clumsily. I cried into the dough, but they rose anyway. That was the first sign. I was still me, somewhere under the ashes. The years passed. I never returned to that house. Never saw Vanda again. I heard from a neighbor that she moved away not long after my letter reached Pastor Jenkins. No one talked much about what happened, but whispers have a way of circling back. All I cared about was that the door had closed behind me and stayed shut. Yolanda gave me more than a roof. She gave me a life. I finished school, got a job at a diner, eventually opened a little food stand of my own outside the flea market. Nothing fancy, just stews, pies, and hot plates. But people came, said it tasted like home. That's when I realized what I was feeding them wasn't just food. It was memory. It was proof that I'd survived. My sisters found me years later. Carmela had never stopped looking. Lucille came too, quieter, carrying her own guilt. We sat in Yolanda's kitchen over coffee and cornbread, and we cried, hugged, forgave. We never spoke much about the dark years, but we rebuilt what Vanda had tried to tear apart. Our sisterhood, our blood, our bond. My daddy died before I saw him again. I thought I'd feel nothing, but I did. Not anger, not grief, just a quiet sadness for the man he could have been, the father he chose not to be. And maybe that's enough. Some wounds don't need closure, just space to breathe. Now at 72, I live in a small house on the edge of town. Still cook every day. Still keep Mama's towel folded in my drawer. I feed folks who stop by hungry, not just for food, but for kindness. I don't ask questions, just fill their plates, because I remember what it's like to starve for something more than bread. If this story spoke to you, please like, subscribe, and share. It helps me keep telling stories that matter, and I'd love to know, how did this story make you feel? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for listening. May your table always be full and your heart always open.